Amanda Makki, Republican strategist and lawyer who joins us from DC into the conversation. Amanda, great to have you with us here on Al Arabiya English as ever. Lots to talk about today. Let's start by talking about this travel ban announced by President Trump. 12 countries, people are barred from entering the United States. The entry of people from 7 others is restricted. What's your reaction here? Is this about security, or is this more about political theatre?
Protecting and defending the United States. That's the #1 issue that should be for every member of Congress and the president, protecting and defending the United States. And that's what President Trump aims to do. Not a surprise. He did this in 2017, although it was more news then than it is now, because obviously we've gone through this once before. And remember, the United States Supreme Court sided with President Trump that he was well within his broad powers to be able to do that, his broad presidential powers.
Okay, so
So it's not a surprise, to answer your question.
Okay.
Okay,
so not a surprise, but tell us about the criteria that were applied. I mean, why these countries in particular, do you think?
I think that the main focus was on facts and statistics, and did these countries have a disproportionate number or even a large percentage of their residents overstay in the United States when they got a temporary visa of any sort. So when you look at some of the numbers, like the Congo, I believe, is in the 50% range of overstaying their visas. That was one of the criteria. And I believe the other criteria was how well managed or mismanaged, I should say, the countries are with their own security, with their own vetting of these people, and the lack of trust that President Trump believes are in these countries to be able to properly vet their own residents and not to create an issue for America, as we saw last week in Colorado, the very tragic occurrence there that happened. Yes, he was an Egyptian national, not one of the countries that was named. So that's a lot of things that people have been talking about. But nevertheless, I think President Trump looked at the at the countries that had the most overstayed visas and the lack of security, and that's where he made a determination. And don't think for a second that this is going to remain the list. I think there's going to be a lot of fluctuations. This is fluid.
Yeah, but I mean, some people would say, isn't it the job of the United States to do its own vetting and to have an adequate vetting process, and not for the countries whose people want to visit the United States?
Well, I think if you look at what Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said, is that it is a privilege to be able to come to this country. I mean, you should look at it as a guest, and you can always tell a guest not to come. You can always invite a guest not to come. So if we are allowing individuals from countries throughout the world to come, we are going to set parameters, and I don't believe it's our job to vet. I think the president says that, you know, these countries that aren't properly vetting, if they're not doing it, they can get their act together. Again, a fluid situation, a fluid list. If they get their act together, this can be revisited.
I think we've had this discussion before. If not, I've had it with lots of people in the United States. But there is this inconvenient fact, which is that American-born citizens are far more, statistically speaking, far more likely to commit acts of mass violence than foreign nationals. I mean, is there a feeling in the US that somehow immigrants are being scapegoated on this one?
Well, U.S. citizens have different rights than foreign nationals. I mean, people from other countries don't have the rights that are given to U.S. citizens. So U.S. citizens should be prosecuted, and prosecuted to the full extent. And certainly President Trump will do that, and he believes in lawfulness. So if it's an issue of why are Americans being treated differently than people from other countries, well, I think that's an obvious thing. I mean, they're not entitled to the same rights. So he believes that this is a way to do it so that you don't have people coming who don't love America, and certainly we've seen that. And so he's carved out a lot of exceptions. If you look at the exceptions, there are quite a few, especially if people have contacts and ties blood ties and familial ties to people who are U.S. citizens in the United States. And so he has carved out exceptions, as he has, for example, for ethnic minorities in Iran, for example, adopted children, for example. So there are quite a few. And again, I would look at this as a fluid document that will go into effect on Monday, June 9th. But that they will work through these things. And I think, again, putting the onus on the countries to do their job, to properly vet and prove that they've done that, will achieve maybe a different result after some time.
Okay, let's move on, because another topic I wanted to talk to you about was Elon Musk, who for 30 days worked alongside President Trump, leading the famous Doge department, very much focused on federal spending cuts. But it looks as though there's been a bit of a falling out here. I don't know what your reading of the situation is, but we've heard from Elon Musk in the last day or two saying that this new tax bill that is put forward by President Trump, which has got a $2.4 trillion price tag over the years. Elon Musk's response to that is, quote, "Bankrupting America is not okay." He called it a disgusting abomination. I mean, is this the end of the Trump-Musk friendship partnership, or is this just a bump in the road?
Well, that's anyone's guess. I believe they're probably still very close. And, Elon Musk was someone who shadowed the president for the better part of the last 9 months, really since he was the assassination attempt where he was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, July, almost a year ago. And so they've remained close, I would assume. But you're allowed to have differences on legislation and on anything else for that matter. I do believe that Elon Musk is someone who has a large, very large, bully pulpit with the X platform that he owns. And he certainly has the most followers and the ability, most importantly perhaps, to engage in congressional races and senatorial races. And I think that's where the fear really is burning the most, is how members of Congress are reacting to, even saying that they didn't read the bill and confessing that they didn't read the bill, because perhaps of their fear of what Elon Musk could do if he puts his thumb on the scale in their races, whether it's to primary a Republican or to support another candidate. And so I think that's the fear that's what's crippling Congress right now, is that they're worried about themselves and what happens in their elections if Elon Musk gets involved. This is a man who spent $20 million to help members of Congress and the president get elected. He has the ability to be very much a game changer in members of Congress's races. And so I think the likelihood of this bill passing really diminished after he weighed in.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting, as you mentioned, a couple of GOP lawmakers saying they didn't actually read the bill. One of them was Marjorie Taylor Greene, another was Mike Flood, saying they didn't read it. I don't know if that's a worry or not. One Republican lawmaker, Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie, has come to Elon Musk's defense. He says, quote, "He knows that if America collapses financially, we aren't going to make it to Mars. He's right." I mean, is there a risk here, do you think, then, of a major split in the ranks of the Republican Party?
Well, the House has passed this bill, but the Senate has not. And no one was ever thinking that the Senate would just take the House bill and pass it. And then, of course, they go to conference, so they have to conference this bill, too, which means they really have to create a mirror image in order to be able to pass a bill that both sides have agreed on. So I think with Elon Musk engaging, what you're going to see is that the Senate, a little bit more of a deliberative process, they're going to make their changes. And one senator has a lot more power than one member of Congress. So I think that the members of the Senate are going to change the bill in a dramatic way that addresses these cuts. And they're going to look at ways that they can offset some of the the tax provisions in order to satiate the desires of people like Elon Musk and Thomas Massie, a real fiscal hawk, another fiscal hawk also from the state of Kentucky, Senator Rand Paul.
Okay, but for someone who's watching, who says, hang on a second, the Republican Party is supposed to be that party that wants to reduce the national debt. And here we are talking about adding 2.4 trillion US dollars to national debt over the years to come. I mean, what does the Republican Party want? Don't they want debt reduction?
Well, they do, and that is why I believe the Senate is going to be the more deliberative body here, where, you know, I worked in both the House and the Senate, and I can tell you, in the House, they just present something, and yeah, there's some changes that can be made, but they really present something, and then the majority has to go with it, and they just need, you know, one to make that majority, one additional. In the Senate, again, one senator can stop the entire process. And so when you have the weight of someone as grand and someone with as much money and bully pulpit, as I said, as Elon Musk, that really gives members of the Senate the opportunity to say, yeah, I don't agree with this. And they feel confident saying that because they know they have the backing of someone like Elon Musk. To really do this right, to your point, you need not only the tax cuts, but you also need reduced government spending. And that's what Elon Musk wants. And now you have members of the Senate that are going to be backing that and pushing for that. So where they said July 4th is when this bill is going to pass, that may just not be the case. They may have to go to the drawing board and make sure that they get this done the right way.
Okay, Amanda, we've spoken in the past about geopolitical issues as well, and I remember you telling us that you had Iranian heritage. So it would be great to get your opinions on a story I expect you're following closely, maybe you're not, but the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei rejecting a central US demand in talks that are aimed at addressing the dispute over Iran's nuclear ambitions. Those talks happened in Oman last weekend, mediated by the US peace envoy, Middle East peace envoy, Steve Witkoff. He's been meeting with the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Where are we with those talks? Have they been derailed, do you think?
Well, I think that was really the litmus test. I mean, where they are on enrichment. And more importantly, Putin has now inserted himself in this discussion, which is ironic given the isolation, really, of the Western world and Putin, and now Putin inserting himself on a major global geopolitical issue that deals with Iran and the United States. And so with Putin saying he can use his abilities and his friendship with Iran to help broker an agreement, I think it makes it very interesting. Now, President Trump just had a call with Xi Jinping of China about an hour ago, and he said that during the call, which sounded like it lasted about 90 minutes, they talked mostly about trade, and he did say specifically, we did not talk about Iran. So I think it's an interesting dynamic that, one, President Trump went out of his way to mention that he did not engage with Xi Jinping on Iran at all. But I also think it's a really interesting development that Putin would want to engage himself in, that the Kremlin is coming out now, after being isolated really in a lot of ways by the Western world, to now help make this a reality. But Iran's been a really tough negotiator. And I think that President Trump is frustrated, but President Trump does have that hard line, but so does Iran. Maybe Russia getting involved will make all the difference.
Yeah, and when we look back to 2015, when President Trump tore up the nuclear deal and reimposed the sanctions, I mean, do you think with hindsight that has made the US and by extension Israel safer? What do you think's changed?
Well, I don't know that it was necessarily that's made the world safer. I mean, certainly, you know, obviously October 7th, what happened there in 2023, you know, there's still unfortunate Houthi action that's happening. So the Iranians haven't stopped. But I think it was something that for President Trump, it was political in nature that he had to do it. He didn't have a choice. He stood firm on that he had to do it. And I think that that's where Trump may be a little different in his 2.0 version, in that he wants to get deals done and not just say no or provide roadblocks. I think he wants to actually see change happen for his legacy. This may be his last 4 years in office, although he's talked about another 4 years. But presuming that at his tender age, this may be his last hurrah as president, I think he wants to see deals get done.
Okay, let's move on to another story we picked out for discussion today. President Trump has ordered a probe into the final years and months of the Biden administration, in particular accusing that administration of somehow covering up the actual state of President Biden's mental faculties. I mean, is this, do you think, a good faith investigation, or is this a bid to discredit his predecessor, do you think?
Maybe a little bit of both. But here, Jake Tapper of CNN, which we've heard all the news about his book for the last week, he has admitted that the decline of President Biden, former President Biden, is something that wasn't really covered as well as it should. Maybe they didn't do all the due diligence they should have done. They certainly would do with President Trump or any Republican president. They didn't do that with Joe Biden. And that admission, I think, is what is fueling this. Then yesterday, you have Karine Jean-Pierre, the former White House press secretary, really the main and biggest voice, certainly the highest level of voice of the Democratic Party, coming out of Joe Biden, saying she's now becoming an independent and talking about those types of things. And so I think this was the timing of this for President Trump was on the heels of a reporter, a very well-known CNN reporter, and even the press secretary of the White House under Joe Biden. And really, it was giving President Trump the fuel to say, we need to know what Joe Biden knew. What did his doctors know? He gets out of office, and all of a sudden, he has this really progressed stage of cancer. How did we not know all of this? And it's not that he was retiring. He was running actively for re-election. So what was the cover-up, and who knew what? I think it's important. I think most Americans want to know this. And so it's not just the White House and the Department of Justice, but it's also the House Oversight Committee, Representative Comer of Kentucky, and they're going to be doing investigations. And he said that he will subpoena the top people around President Biden to get them to say, under penalties of perjury, what they knew and when they knew it.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, there's a lot of focus again on this Autopen saga. I mean, Autopens, for people who don't know, are, mechanical means of signing things, because clearly presidents and other important figures have a lot of things to sign. But they've been used, haven't they, by presidents on both sides of the aisle for decades. I mean, is this really a smoking gun, the fact that President Biden used an Autopen for the signature of some documents?
Well, it certainly could be if he wasn't under the mental capability to be able to know what he was signing. You have people who didn't get pardons. For example, Michael Cohen, a name that we know, the fixer under President Trump, he was seeking a pardon. He is now using the excuse that President Biden didn't have the faculties to be able to really know whether or not he should give him a pardon. And so he was wrong, and he wants to appeal that pardon. And so I think it's just interesting that you have all these people that are now using this as an opportunity for themselves, but also it just tells you how much of an issue this is when the former president of the United States was so in decline, the media is talking about it, former staff are talking about it, and yet it was covered up. So what did he know, and who was doing what when he was signing these 8,000 or so pardons that he submitted? So I do think it's something valuable for Americans to know. Was there a cover-up? I think that's ultimately what Americans want to know. And if they get to the bottom of it and there wasn't, as President Biden and his wife had said, then so be it. but the American people want to know. We clearly saw a declining president, both mentally and physically, and the American people deserve to know.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure talking to you. Amanda Makki, Republican strategist. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.